God-fearing young woman with a rising career in law enforcement.
She loved to help people.
She was a ray of light.
And he was the man who joined her in holy matrimony.
The two quickly became inseparable.
She opened her heart. She fell in love.
But hearts are broken when gunshots ring out in the night.
He tried his best to protect her. I literally felt my world turn upside down. I lost my whole soul.
What initially seems like an open and shut case is anything but.
They now have a double homicide. He owed a kingpin a lot of money.
And when dark secrets come to the surface, they'll send the case spiraling out of control.
She didn't know that he was married.
The woman was pregnant.
I was totally shocked.
But he was gonna lose everything.
Can't take this.
Ain't no way you could tell me you loved her and turn around and do that. That was hate.
27th, 2021. It's a chilly fall day in Covington, Georgia, a small city about 40 miles east of Atlanta.
Covington is a very nice suburban area and a great place to raise a family.
If you talk to anyone from Covington, they refer to themselves as the Hollywood of the South because numerous shows and blockbuster movies have been shot in the city of Covington.
But as night falls on this charming southern community, a horror story begins to play out in real life.
Around 10:30 p.m. that night, Tyrone McPherson was driving to his cousin's house to hang out.
As Tyrone makes his way to the neighborhood where his cousin, 35-year-old Jaquabia Bo Jackson lives, he receives a call from him.
Bo was frantic.
Whoa, calm down, man. What happened?
Bo told him his wife had just been shot.
Bo was too frantic to give too much information, aside from the fact that there was two assailants.
All right, listen, I just pulled up. Just stay with it. I'm gonna call the cops.
Tyrone hangs up with his cousin and calls police.
Newton County 911.
Hello, yes, there's been a shooting. I need some help. Send some help, quick.
Newton County investigators race to the home.
They know time is of the essence in a situation like this.
When the police arrived, Tyrone was outside with his cousin.
Come on!
Bo kept repeating, I knew this was gonna happen. They just came into the house and they started shooting.
Bo is hysterical, holding a gun in his hand.
Sir, drop the weapon, please.
She's inside. I did everything I could.
He begins to sob and says that his wife has been shot and he tried his best to protect her.
Police slowly make their way inside the home with guns drawn.
They have no earthly idea whether Bo's wife is dead or alive, or even if the shooters are still on the scene.
Investigators don't find any sign of the shooters, but they do find Bo's wife, 28-year-old Shakima Brown Jackson.
She appeared to have been shot several times.
An officer checks for any sign of life but does not find a pulse. Shakima is gone.
Shakima Brown Jackson was a warm-hearted young woman dedicated to living out her faith.
She was the most special thing in life I could ever hold and endure. My little cousin, she was a ray of light. She lit up any room that she walked into. She's funny, too smart for her own good. Shakima was a great, bubbly person, very jokeful, loved the Lord.
Shakima was very active in her church and she loved volunteering.
Right away, I could see that she was really serious about learning about God. She came to me and said, yeah, I would like to teach. And so I told her to prepare some lessons and see how you do.
Let's start with the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you, God, for this Bible study that we're having on tonight, Lord. I just thank you.
Shakima never, ever missed Bible study.
He surrendered up his life so that we may have eternal life.
Shakima would always encourage me and just be like, see where God leads you.
For Shakima, she believed God was leading her to a career in law enforcement.
She loved to help people. And the job that she was getting into, she felt like that she could be a part of something bigger than herself.
On the job, she met the man who would eventually become her husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
She was working as a security guard in a manufacturing company.
She would let people in, let them out.
Bo was a successful truck driver.
Well, seeing you always makes my day.
Thank you.
The attraction was there, and Bo didn't waste any time.
Mind if I take you out this weekend?
I'd like that.
He became this wonderful man to her because she opened her heart. She fell in love.
She was just excited to, have somebody that was quiet and didn't seem like they was out there doing everything under the sun.
In February of 2020, the couple promised themselves to one another in holy matrimony. And that fall, Shakima gave birth to their son.
She did everything for this kid. She was an immaculate mom. Everything, this was her world. Boy, her world lit up. He was her ray of sunshine, literally. He got this infectious smile from Shakima.
After the birth of her son, Shakima was more driven than ever.
She was very interested in becoming a deputy.
She was determined to do everything. With a baby, with a husband, I'm determined. I'm gonna be a deputy sheriff.
Shakima's determination paid off.
She worked hard at it, she studied it. She was in mandate for months and months. And I remember the day she called me on the floor screaming and hollering, "Mommy, I did it, I did it." I said, "Yes, baby, I knew you could, I told you."
Bo and the rest of her family were so proud of Shakima.
But only a month after her promotion, Shakima's fellow deputies have found her inside her home, covered in blood.
We did discover Shakima Jackson, deceased on the couch, appeared to have been shot several times.
However, police soon learned that Shakima isn't the only victim of this deadly shooting.
On the other side of the room is the body of a man lying face down.
He's been shot one time in the back of the head.
They now have a double homicide on their hands.
With her husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson by her side, 28-year-old Shakima Brown Jackson was ready to take on the world.
She was just so excited to be a deputy sheriff. She had just graduated the mandate process, and she was certified.
Shakima had a great reputation. She was a hard worker. She was a Fulton County deputy. Everybody had nothing but positive things to say about her.
However, just 1 month after her promotion, Shakima has fallen victim to a horrific shooting.
Shakima had been shot 7 times, once in the shoulder, 3 times in the chest, and another 3 times in the face.
To detectives, it seems like overkill.
That's a lot of time to shoot someone. There was a lot of rage behind these shots.
And Shakima isn't the only victim.
On the other side of the room is the body of a man lying face down on the floor.
He was shot in the back of his head through his hoodie.
But who is he?
His driver's license identified him as Lavoy Brown, Shakima's older brother.
30-year-old Lavoy Brown wasn't just Shakima's big brother. He was her best friend.
They just always stuck together. They never even had fights.
You couldn't say Lavoy without Shakima and Shakima without Lavoy. He was an active member in our church also. He loved God.
Everybody in the church, when they first came, thought they were twins because of how close they were. They interacted so well together. I'm saying these 2 young folks are really, really humble and loving towards one another.
Lavoy was her full protector. He protected his sister from head to toe. You hear me? He was her, how you say, ride or die? They did everything.
So how did this beloved brother and sister end up shot to death, just mere feet from each other?
There were no shell casings in the living room at all. At that moment, I thought somebody just picked them up to cover their tracks.
But investigators do find a spent .45 caliber projectile.
It's covered in sheetrock and fiber. It's as if it had gone through the leg of the couch.
It appears as if the bullet was shot at a low angle at the end of the hallway out toward the living room.
Going down the hallway, there was pieces of sheetrock that were on the floor. At that time, we just knew that we had 2 people dead and we only had 1 person there that was possibly a witness, and that was Jaquavia.
He has been taken to the station and is awaiting to give a formal statement.
But before detectives can head back to the station to interview Shakima's husband, her panicked mother arrives on the scene.
I pulls up. I see the yellow tape. I'm like, God, yellow tape. You know, I'm from New York. When you see yellow tape, that's death.
We can't let you inside.
What is going on?
Can't
Where
let you
are
inside.
my babies? Where are my babies?
I'm screaming out, she's a deputy. She's one of y'all. Ah, where my kids? Lavoy, screaming, hollering.
Are they gone?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
He said 2 people came in there and killed them. I dropped to my knees. Them officers, all they could do is shake their head.
Losing a son and a daughter in the same night. It was such a tragedy.
When I see my kids come out in the body bag, it's like I lost my whole soul. I lost myself. I lost myself.
When the news spreads to the rest of Shakima and Lavoy's loved ones, they're equally devastated.
I can't even explain the hurt. It's like being in a storm and the wind blowing everybody everywhere. There was a lot of pain, a lot of questions, me praying to God, asking why.
I literally felt my world turn upside down. Literally. Like it was night and day. I'm calling, I'm trying to call whoever to find out what's going on. I'm even calling Lavoy and Shakima phone because I'm like, okay, I can't believe it.
40 miles away, at Fulton County Sheriff's Headquarters, Shakima's co-workers are also struggling to come to terms with the tragic news.
Once I found out what was going on, it was just unreal. I was just heartbroken because of the relationship that we had built and what she meant to the sheriff's office and the people that she worked with. And she didn't deserve that at all.
Back at the Covington police station, homicide detectives sit down with Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
He still appeared to be pretty distraught.
Bo, tell us what happened tonight.
Bo says earlier that evening, Shakima informed him that her brother would be coming over with a couple of his friends.
Lavoy knows 2 guys that would like to get in the trucking business and want to come by and talk trucking business with him.
I mean, it would really mean a lot to my brother.
I don't know. It's kind of short notice, and my cousin's already coming over tonight.
He don't feel comfortable about it because he don't know these people.
But Bo says Shakima was insistent.
Honey, it's not gonna take that long. Come on.
Okay, fine.
Around dinner time, Lavoy came over to wait for his friends. But as it got later in the night, Bo told him that it was too late for his friends to come over.
It's getting kind of late, boy.
Come on, man. Just meet with them. You might like what they have to say.
What do you mean?
You help these people out? That's $500 a day, man.
Bo tells detectives that's when he realized what Lavoy and his friends were really after. And it wasn't business advice.
These men that were coming over to the house were in the drug game.
Jaquavia starts then saying that Lavoy is trying to get him to run drugs, that he's only wanting him to get these trucks and stuff like that so he can run stuff up for him in the trucks and whatnot and try to help him out in an illegal business.
According to Bo, Lavoy said he owed a kingpin a lot of money, and this was the only way he can think to repay his debt.
Please, man, I owe these people so much money. Help me out on this, man.
You're gonna have to find another way. You better tell your friends it's off.
Bo said he declined to get involved.
But Bo explains that before he and Lavoy could continue their discussion, the men showed up at the house.
It must be him.
What's up? What's up?
This is my brother-in-law, Jaquavia, but you can call him Bo.
Bo claimed the men introduced themselves as Barry and City.
And Bo says Shakima welcomed them with open arms.
Can I get you two anything?
I'll take a water if you don't mind.
Sure.
Bo tells detectives he immediately got a bad feeling, so he excused himself to go grab his pistol from the bedroom.
Show me, sit down.
Excuse me, one moment. I'll be right back.
From the bedroom, Bo says he could hear the three men start talking business.
What do you have for us?
My brother-in-law, he's a truck driver. He can transport some of that stuff across the country.
Okay. I mean, we've been helping you out a lot.
He could hear them talking for a moment, and then the volume of their voices increased.
It started to get heated.
He said that he could hear them arguing with Lavoy.
Please, I need more time.
You out of time. We want the money now.
He hears yelling,
What's going on?
and then he hears gunshots.
Detectives investigating the double homicide of Shakima Brown Jackson and her brother Lavoy Brown are speaking with Shakima's husband, Jaquavia Bo Jackson.
Bo claimed that on the night of the murders, Lavoy invited some men over with the hopes of convincing him of transporting drugs on his truck.
And Bo says when he excused himself from the conversation, he could hear it get heated from the back bedroom.
He said that he could hear the men arguing with Lavoy.
Please, I need more time.
You out of time. We want the money now.
Then Bo says he heard Shakima enter.
What's going on?
He hears yelling, and then he hears gunshots.
In an attempt to scare the men off, Bo says he then cocked his gun.
He leans out the back bedroom door and fires one shot towards the living room area, towards the male.
The bullet scraped the side of the wall. Detectives note that this is probably the projectile that they found on the living room floor, covered in sheetrock.
By the time Bo made it back into the living room, the men were gone.
He sees Lavoy's dead. He sees Shakima's dead.
Yo, Tyrone!
In a state of shock, the first person he thought to call was his cousin Tyrone, who was already on his way over.
She bleeding bad.
Whoa, calm down, man. What happened?
Detectives asked Bo if he had any type of description about these men called Barry and City.
One was heavy set and short, one tall and skinny.
Detectives are skeptical of Bo's story.
It seems highly unlikely that Lavoy would be mixed up in the drug game.
Lavoy has no history of drug-related arrests. In fact, he has no criminal background at all, for that matter.
But one element of Bo's story does add up.
The gun Bo was holding at the crime scene wasn't a match for the bullets that killed Shakima and Lavoy.
Bo's gun was a .45 caliber pistol.
The bullets retrieved from the victims' bodies were consistent with a different type of weapon.
That firearm, based on what the forensics stated, it was a Colt revolver, 38 Special to .357 Magnum.
Could Bo be telling the truth? Hoping for more insight into his relationship with his wife, detectives bring in Shakima's mother, Zona Inman, the next morning to give an official statement.
She was still understandably heartbroken after what happened to her two children.
You got a mother coming out here who didn't lose one child. She lost two children all at one time from one act of violence.
Is it possible that Levoy or Shakima had ties to gangs or drug affiliates?
I'm sorry, what?
We talking and he's saying a whole bunch of mess about all of this crazy nonsense. It don't even sound right. That's hard to believe. What, 2 guys?
That is ridiculous.
Like, they don't mix. Come on, Shakima and Lavoy. If anybody knows them, come on now.
If you knew them personally, you'll know you could never identify them with anything dealing with drugs.
Lavoy was a hard worker and a very good man. He would never get involved in the street life. And he would never do anything to put his sister's career or safety at risk.
Okay. I can understand that. But what can you tell us about Shakima's relationship with her husband? Any issues there?
Oh, yes.
She told me that Shakima and Jaquavia had been having marital problems, that Jaquavia had actually moved into another bedroom. They were having issues with money and stuff like that.
You talking when I'm talking. Stop talking when I'm talking. Stop talking when I'm talking.
So Shakima and Jaquavius were arguing every day. Their marriage started going down.
Zona explains that although Bo worked in trucking at the beginning of the marriage, by October of 2021, he had been laid off.
I can't afford to keep doing this. I ain't trying to hear all that, man.
I don't know what happened, but he had to resign, so they claim. They were having issues with the bills. It was always the bills. And he was lack of work. He couldn't help her pay nothing.
But it wasn't just money problems they were having.
Shakima had just found out that Bo had been unfaithful, and she discovered it in the worst way possible.
Letters started arriving to the house, ordering Bo to take a paternity test.
Not only had Bo cheated on her, but the woman was pregnant.
Detectives investigating the murder of Shakima Brown Jackson and Lavoy Brown are speaking with the siblings' mother, Zona Inman. And they've just learned that Shakima's husband, Bo, had been hiding a horrible secret from her.
Not only had Bo cheated on Shakima, but he had gotten another woman pregnant.
She on the child support for the kid, and they sent the letter.
Shakima confronted Bo about the letters.
Bo, what is this?
Wow, this is ridiculous.
Bo, you can be honest with me. What's going on?
Come on, babe. You know I never cheat on you.
With their relationship teetering on the edge, Bo made a promise to Shakima.
Jaquavia told her that's not his kid, she's lying on me, and I'll prove it.
He said he would take the paternity test, but was certain they would come back negative.
I will take the test and you will see. Don't worry.
While Shakima was hoping for the best, she had her doubts.
She called me saying, if he fails these tests, I'm taking my son and I'm leaving.
Because believe me, my daughter is not going to deal with you and she know you cheating, because she's not going to stand for that.
But to everyone's surprise, the results indicate Bo is not the father.
The paternity results were negative, as Bo had predicted.
How did the other woman take the news?
Not well. She still believed that the child is his.
This girl was very adamant, I'm going to get your daughter and Bo. I'm going to take them down. This is his baby. He's going to claim it.
Was it possible this woman was involved in the killing somehow?
Well, thank you for coming in, and again, we're sorry for your loss.
Detectives are eager to speak with Bo's mistress, Destiny Burkett. But before they can track her down, she comes to them.
I got notified by dispatch that there was a female that wanted to speak with me in reference to Jaquavia Jackson.
Thank you for coming in, Miss Burkett.
Of course.
So tell us about your history with Mr. Jackson.
She was in a relationship with Jaquavia. She didn't know that he was married, and then when they split up, by that point, she was pregnant.
When I told him about the pregnancy, he wanted nothing to do with it.
He was in complete denial that the child was his.
Bo told her to leave him alone because he did not want his wife finding out that he had cheated. Eventually, he stopped accepting any of her calls and texts.
But what am I supposed to do? Raising a child alone isn't easy. So I decided to get the courts involved.
She wanted Jaquavia to start paying child support, and so she wanted him to take a paternity test.
She just wanted Bo to take accountability for his actions and assist her financially with their child.
But when the paternity test came back, it showed that Jaquavia wasn't the father.
However, Destiny isn't buying it.
She's like, I know he's the father. He was the only one I was with.
She said that she was absolutely convinced that Bo had rigged the DNA test.
So how do you think he rigged it?
Look at this.
Whenever someone comes to take a paternity test, a DNA test, they actually take a picture of whoever shows up.
When she looked at the photos, she knew it was not Jaquavia that had taken that test.
They look at the man in the photo, and she's right. It's clearly not Bo Jackson.
It's a completely different person. It would appear that he sent someone else to take the test in his place.
But that's not all.
My attorneys discovered that I wasn't the only one he did this to.
There was a second woman who came forward saying Bo did the exact same thing to her and faked a paternity test to avoid paying child support.
How many mistresses did Bo have?
While investigating the murder of Shakima Brown Jackson, detectives have discovered that her husband, Bo, had potentially gotten 2 other women pregnant.
I wasn't the only one he did this to.
2 women had come forward and requested paternity tests in an effort to try to get child support from Mr. Jackson. There was clear evidence that showed that he sent someone else other than himself to go take the DNA test in a clear attempt to try to show that he was not the father, even if he really was.
He had the person go to take the paternity test for him. That's out of the box. I've never heard of anybody doing that.
For you to sit down and plot something as crazy as this. He was sneaky, very sneaky. He's a liar. Everything came out his mouth was a lie.
And Destiny says when she found out about Bo's other pregnant mistress, the 2 women decided to join forces against him.
We had our attorneys submit for follow-up paternity testing and a court date set to argue our case.
Everything was leading up to their day in court. The courts had even subpoenaed witnesses.
One of those witnesses was Shakima Brown Jackson.
The court subpoenaed Shakima to help confirm that the man Bo sent to take the paternity test was indeed not Bo.
But Destiny says they never made it to their day in court.
The court date was scheduled for October 28th, the day after Shakima and Lavoy were murdered.
The hearing was supposed to be today, but here we are.
Detectives believe that this is not a coincidence. They are truly starting to believe that Bo Jackson's story of 2 drug dealers killing his wife and brother-in-law are bogus.
So we go out the next morning, we do a more comprehensive canvass of the neighborhood.
They noticed that the home directly across the street from the Jacksons' residence had security cameras set up.
We wanted to know, did he catch anything on camera? So we went up and tried to get the video from them.
But detectives are out of luck.
They advised us it doesn't work. It hasn't worked for months.
Sure wish I could be more help. Wait a minute, one other thing, though.
He did advise us that Jaquavia reached out to him and did ask about the camera. He wanted to know if his camera worked. The neighbor told him, no, my camera doesn't work. It hasn't worked in a while.
This as a major red flag. Why would Bo be concerned about if their cameras were working or not?
Thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
That just, to me, added more suspicion towards Jaquavia.
And in speaking with another neighbor, investigators hit the jackpot.
Their security cameras are functioning.
The surveillance camera pointed towards Mr. Jackson's front yard and the beginning of the driveway in the mailbox.
Back at the station, detectives begin poring over the footage.
The detectives scrubbed through to about 10:20 p.m. on October 27th, which is when Bo claims the killers arrived. However, they watch the road and they don't see a single car pull up to the Jacksons' residence.
10:21. You hear these shots go off.
This could only mean one thing. The shots came from someone already inside the house.
Bo's story about Barry and City is a lie.
Nothing that Jaquavier had told me in our interview or the day that he talked to the deputies was corroborated with the video.
With this evidence, detectives have exactly what they need to obtain an arrest warrant for Jaquavier Bo Jackson.
Yeah, this is Hicks. We got him.
So we took arrest warrants that day for murder, aggravated assault, and several other charges, and we took him into custody. His demeanor went from nothing to all of a sudden, you got the wrong guy, trying to drum tears up or something, and act as if he was definitely the one person that did not do this, that he was being falsely arrested.
And the dramatics don't stop there.
It appears that Bo is very uncomfortable. He's wincing and shifting around in his seat.
Are you nervous?
It's not that at all, man. It's my stomach.
He claims to have had ulcers or something like that.
The detectives get him something to drink to try to soothe his stomach so they can move on with the interview.
Honestly, tell us what happened.
I told you. Leroy brought in some bad dudes who wanted drug money. He couldn't pay up, so they killed him.
Bo is adamant that what he said before was true.
Detectives tell Bo that the jig is up. They confront him with the surveillance footage and tell him that his story does not make sense.
It's then that Bo throws himself from his chair.
He's, oh man, you act like you don't believe me. Oh, my stomach. And he started acting like he was getting sick in the interview.
Babe, call the doctor.
He says his stomach is on fire.
Detectives suspect that Bo is faking the pain to get out of questioning, but they can't say for sure.
Bo is taken to the hospital to be treated before being sent to jail.
Get up. They wouldn't be getting any confessions out of him.
But even without a confession from the man himself, Bo goes to trial for double homicide on July 24th, 2023.
He pled not guilty. His defense, and remained to be the same defense, was that these two random people showed up to the house that night and shot and killed Lavoy and Shakima. That was the only defense they had.
When it's their turn, prosecutors present what they believe really happened.
They believe that things were on the rocks between Bo and Shakima.
I noticed my daughter wasn't happy anymore. She wasn't smiling anymore. She would, Mom, what do I need to do?
And when the letter arrived about a court-ordered paternity test for Bo's mistress, Destiny Burkett, Shakima had reached her breaking point.
Bo, what is this?
She couldn't believe her husband was being accused of fathering another woman's child.
They were talking about separation.
But when the paternity test came back negative, Shakima decided to give Bo one more chance.
Marriage was very sacred to Shakima. She wanted to trust her husband.
Now they're talking about trying to work things out.
However, Bo knew that his true colors were soon to be revealed.
Shakima received more letters from the court, now summoning her to be a witness in the paternity case.
She thought this was a follow-up court date to confirm that Bo wasn't the father.
Little did she know at the court date, she would have found out that her husband was accused of fathering children with multiple women and had faked the previous paternity test that he took.
She was about to learn the truth about everything.
Prosecutors argue that it wasn't a coincidence that Shakima died the day before they were due in court.
She was definitely gonna divorce him.
He'd been lying to her their entire marriage. He was possibly gonna lose everything he had. He wasn't gonna have anywhere to go.
Not only would he lose his meal ticket if Shakima divorced him, but she also would have likely got custody of her child, and Bo would have had to pay her child support.
Bo couldn't let that happen. If Shakima didn't want to be with him and put up with his philandering ways, she had to go.
But why did Lavoy have to go too? Although Jaquavia Bo Jackson refuses to admit culpability in the double murder of his wife, Shakima Brown Jackson, and her brother, Lavoy Brown, prosecutors are confident in their theory of what happened.
Bo had been lying to Shakima about the other women he'd been sleeping around with.
And at the paternity hearing scheduled for October 28, 2021, Shakima was going to discover the truth.
He knew that would be the last straw in their marriage, and she'd likely divorce him. She would keep their home and their son.
He thought he was about to lose everything.
So Bo did the unthinkable.
I think he, on the fly, kind of concocted this idea of, I'm gonna kill Shakima.
He grabbed the .38 caliber revolver and went into the living room.
She was just literally scrolling Facebook, comfortable on her own couch, watching videos when she was shot. Lavoy was asleep, and the initial gunshots scared him. He started to run, and he was shot in the back of the head, and he fell forward.
He just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
After Shakima and Lavoy were dead, Bo tried to stage the scene as if intruders had committed the crime.
Prosecutors believe Bo got rid of the .38 after he killed Shakima Lavoy, then used the .45 to stage a defensive shot.
And there's a good 3 or 4 minute gap between the group of shots that clearly are the murder shots, and then what we think is the defendant's sort of staged self-defense or defense of other shots that happened about 3 minutes later.
As the prosecution rests, the case is handed over to the jury to decide.
After the jury deliberated for some time, they came back with a verdict.
Jaquavia Bo Jackson was found guilty of 2 counts of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during a felony.
He's sentenced to life without parole, plus 10 years.
He'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
He never showed his emotions, even throughout the entire trial. Even once he was being sentenced, nothing changed. He had a very cold look on his face the entire time.
A follow paternity test determined Bo was the father of Destiny's baby boy. He wasn't the father of the second mistress baby.
For the family and friends of Shakima and Lavoy, it's a somber end to their loved one's story.
Justice has been served, even though, it's still heartbreaking.
There's no way you could tell me you loved her and turn around and do that. Nah. That was hate.
The child has to grow up without a dad. No dad, no mom, no nothing. I'm grandma, you know what I'm saying? I can't teach him manly things in spite of what I'm going through. I have to trust the process of God.
They should be remembered as people always trying to help. People that impacted their community, impacted their environment with fun and love.
I just want them to be remembered by their smile and laughter. It was always jokes with us. They're both goofy.
In honor of Shakima and her brother, Shakima's fellow Fulton County deputies created Operation Take a Stand, a new categorization system that helps police prioritize victims of domestic violence.
They came up with a system of picking out warrants.
The Atlantic does not scream. It whispers. Every wave that reaches the shore arrives carrying something unseen, something older than memory itself. Along the narrow ribbon of sand stretching beside Ocean Parkway on Long Island, the wind moves through the coarse beach grass with an almost human rhythm, bending each blade before letting it rise again. Drivers pass this lonely road every day, windows rolled up, radios humming softly, never imagining that just beyond the guardrail, hidden behind tangled shrubs and low pines, the earth had been keeping a secret for years. It was a place built for silence. Not the peaceful silence of an empty beach at sunrise, but the unsettling kind that makes every distant sound seem misplaced. The gulls circled overhead. The salt air drifted inland. The tide erased footprints before anyone could notice they had ever existed. Nature was patient here. It covered, concealed, and waited. Somewhere beneath that sand lay stories that no one was looking for. For years, women disappeared. One by one. Different towns. Different nights. Different names. Each disappearance entered the system as another missing person report, another photograph pinned to a bulletin board, another family refusing to believe the phone would never ring again. Detectives opened files. Officers asked questions. Friends retraced final conversations. Mothers replayed every decision they had ever made, wondering if one different word might have changed everything. Nothing connected. At least, that was what everyone believed. The women lived lives that often remained invisible to society. Many earned money through online escort advertisements. Some struggled financially. Some battled addiction. Others were trying desperately to build a better future for their children. Their stories were complicated, but they were not defined by the circumstances that made them vulnerable. They laughed. They planned birthdays. They worried about rent. They called their sisters late at night. They promised their children they would come home soon. Then they vanished. Without witnesses. Without answers. Without justice. The disappearances rarely dominated national headlines. News coverage appeared briefly before fading beneath newer tragedies. Families organized searches with volunteers carrying flashlights through wooded trails and abandoned lots. Flyers weathered under rain until the ink blurred into faded shadows. Every passing week made hope harder to hold. Still, someone knew exactly what had happened. Someone drove away after each encounter. Someone returned home. Someone ate dinner, watched television, went to work the next morning, and blended into ordinary life while families spent holidays staring at empty chairs around the table. The years passed. Questions remained. Then, almost by accident, the silence began to break. In December of 2010, a search operation was launched for another missing woman. Officers and search teams moved through the dense vegetation near Gilgo Beach with trained dogs, expecting perhaps to find a single clue connected to one disappearance. No one anticipated that every step into those overgrown dunes was carrying them toward one of the largest serial murder investigations in modern American history. The first discovery changed everything. A body. Wrapped carefully. Hidden just far enough from the roadway that thousands of passing vehicles had unknowingly traveled beside it. Investigators widened the search. Then another body appeared. Then another. Then another. The realization settled over the investigators with unbearable weight. This was not an isolated homicide. This was not a random act of violence hidden beneath the sand. Someone had been returning here. Again. And again. And again. Each new discovery transformed the landscape itself. What had once looked like untouched coastline suddenly became a map of calculated decisions. Every cluster of brush, every patch of reeds, every narrow opening between the trees became a possible crime scene. Detectives no longer searched for one victim. They searched for a pattern. The pattern was horrifying. Young women. Similar circumstances. Bodies discarded within the same remote corridor. Some wrapped in burlap. Someone had taken time. Someone had planned. This was not chaos. It was method. The realization spread beyond Suffolk County within hours. Television crews arrived with satellite trucks. Helicopters hovered above stretches of coastline that had been forgotten by most of the world. Reporters stood against the cold Atlantic wind trying to explain how a quiet beach had suddenly become synonymous with death. But the cameras could never capture what investigators felt when they stepped beyond the pavement. Because the beach itself seemed unwilling to give up its secrets. The vegetation was thick enough to hide a person only yards away. The dunes shifted with storms. Salt water accelerated decay. Wildlife disturbed evidence. Every passing season blurred the timeline a little further. Time had become an accomplice. Whoever committed these crimes understood something many killers never do. Isolation is stronger than locks. Distance is stronger than walls. A place that no one visits becomes the perfect place to disappear forever. As investigators assembled evidence, another disturbing detail emerged. Several victims had advertised escort services online shortly before disappearing. During the late 2000s, internet classified websites created opportunities for independent sex workers to connect directly with clients. Those platforms also offered predators something they had always wanted: access. Fast. Anonymous. Temporary. A phone call. A meeting. A cash payment. Then nothing. For many families, there was no immediate reason to assume the worst. Missed calls happened. Phones died. Plans changed. Days became weeks before fear finally replaced hope. By then, precious time had already slipped away. Some relatives refused to stop searching. One mother answered every unknown phone number that appeared on her screen, convinced her daughter might finally be calling home. One sister replayed old voicemail messages simply to hear a familiar voice. One child grew older asking questions that no adult knew how to answer. The suffering did not end with disappearance. In one of the most chilling allegations connected to the investigation, prosecutors later said that the person responsible made taunting phone calls to a family member of one victim after her disappearance. The calls were brief, cruel, and calculated, serving not to communicate information but to deepen unimaginable grief. Whether measured in seconds or minutes, each call carried a message more terrifying than words alone. The caller believed he would never be caught. Confidence is a dangerous thing. Some criminals run because they fear discovery. Others slow down because they believe discovery is impossible. Years passed before investigators truly understood which kind of killer they were facing. The investigation itself became a maze of frustration. Different agencies shared information imperfectly. Leadership changed. Public criticism intensified. Advances in forensic science were still years away. Every unanswered question created another opening for speculation. Rumors spread faster than evidence. Some believed there was only one killer. Others suspected multiple offenders. Every theory generated headlines. Very few generated proof. Meanwhile, Ocean Parkway remained exactly where it had always been. Cars continued moving along the asphalt. Tourists visited nearby beaches during the summer. Families spread blankets beneath warm sunlight only a short distance away. Life continued beside death. Perhaps that is what makes this story so deeply unsettling. Not because evil hid inside abandoned buildings or forgotten forests. It lived beside ordinary life. It existed within commuting distance of New York City. It occupied the same roads, gas stations, restaurants, and neighborhoods as everyone else. The person responsible may have stood in line for morning coffee, may have exchanged polite smiles with strangers, may have returned home each evening appearing completely unremarkable. History has repeatedly shown that monsters rarely announce themselves. More often, they master the appearance of normality. That possibility haunted investigators more than any physical evidence. Because if the killer truly belonged to the community rather than existing outside it, every familiar face became another unanswered question. Every routine interaction became another possibility. Somewhere in Long Island, someone knew something. Perhaps they dismissed unusual behavior. Perhaps they explained away strange absences. Perhaps they noticed nothing at all. The greatest mysteries are not always hidden by extraordinary deception. Sometimes they survive because ordinary life is so effective at disguising extraordinary darkness. For more than a decade, that darkness remained untouched. Families buried hope piece by piece. Detectives retired. New investigators inherited boxes of reports thicker than encyclopedias. Technology evolved. DNA science advanced. Cell phone analysis became more sophisticated. Digital footprints that once seemed meaningless slowly transformed into evidence waiting to be recognized. The passage of time, once the killer's greatest ally, was beginning to change sides. But no one standing beside those windswept dunes in the winter of 2010 could have imagined how long the road ahead would become. No one knew that the investigation would stretch across 13 years. No one knew that the answers would emerge from thousands of pages of records, microscopic strands of hair, forgotten phone data, and the relentless determination of investigators unwilling to allow the victims to disappear twice, first from the world, and then from memory. This is not only the story of a serial killer. It is the story of the women whose names deserved to be spoken long before the nation finally learned them. It is the story of families forced to live between hope and grief. It is the story of an investigation repeatedly tested by failure, politics, time, and the limits of forensic science. And above all, it is the story of a stretch of coastline where the ocean never confessed, the sand never testified, and silence became the most faithful witness of all. Long before the case became known around the world, Gilgo Beach was simply another stretch of coastline on the southern edge of Long Island, New York. To most people, it was a place associated with summer afternoons, salt air, and long drives along Ocean Parkway. Families visited nearby beaches when the weather was warm. Fishermen stood patiently near the shoreline before sunrise. Cyclists traveled the quiet roads that ran parallel to the Atlantic Ocean. It looked like the kind of landscape where life slowed down. Yet beneath that peaceful image was a geography unlike almost anywhere else in the region. Ocean Parkway cuts through a narrow barrier island, with the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly on one side and marshland, reeds, and dense brush on the other. Much of the vegetation is low enough to disappear beneath the horizon from the road, but thick enough to conceal objects or even human remains from anyone driving past only a few dozen feet away. During much of the year, the area is sparsely populated, especially after dark. The wind is constant, carrying sand across the road and masking distant sounds. At night, long sections of the parkway are illuminated only by scattered streetlights and passing headlights. For investigators who would later study the crime scenes, the landscape itself became an important part of the story. The location offered privacy, limited foot traffic, and natural concealment. Exposure to weather, wildlife, and changing seasons also complicated the recovery and preservation of forensic evidence. These environmental factors would become significant challenges throughout the investigation. The years leading up to the discoveries were marked not by a single shocking event, but by a series of disappearances that, at first, appeared unrelated. Across different cities and towns, young women went missing. Each family experienced the same terrible uncertainty. A phone that suddenly stopped ringing. A text message that was never answered. Appointments missed without explanation. Loved ones who insisted that something was wrong, even when there was little evidence to prove it. Several of the women later connected to the investigation worked as escorts and advertised their services online. During the late 2000s, internet platforms had changed the nature of that work, allowing clients and escorts to arrange meetings directly through mobile phones and classified websites. While these platforms created new opportunities for communication, they also made it easier for offenders to conceal their identities through disposable phones and false information. It is important to understand that the victims' occupations did not define who they were. They were daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends. Some were raising children. Others hoped to overcome financial hardship. Several maintained close relationships with their families despite difficult circumstances. Like many people facing economic instability, they made complicated choices while trying to navigate equally complicated lives. Their disappearances deserved the same urgency as any other missing person case. In hindsight, investigators would identify similarities among several victims. Many had accepted appointments with clients shortly before they disappeared. Communication often stopped abruptly. Personal belongings were left behind. Family members described behavior that was inconsistent with voluntarily leaving their lives behind. At the time, however, those connections were not immediately obvious. Missing person investigations are among the most difficult cases law enforcement can face. Adults may leave voluntarily. Witnesses often remember events differently. Digital evidence can disappear quickly, especially in an era before smartphones routinely recorded detailed location histories. Detectives working individual cases often have access only to the information available within their own jurisdictions. Without a clear pattern, the disappearances remained separate investigations. The broader picture had not yet emerged. Meanwhile, Long Island itself presented a striking contrast. Only a short drive from New York City, it combined densely populated suburbs with quiet coastal communities. Millions of people lived within commuting distance, yet there were still isolated stretches of shoreline where very few people ventured outside the summer season. That contrast would later become one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. The crimes, as alleged by prosecutors, were not committed in some remote wilderness hundreds of miles from civilization. They unfolded within one of the most populated metropolitan regions in the United States. Ordinary life continued all around them. Morning traffic filled the highways. Schools opened each weekday. Restaurants welcomed customers. Children played in neighborhood parks. Nothing about daily life suggested that one of America's most complex serial homicide investigations was quietly taking shape. As the years passed, families of the missing women continued searching for answers. They contacted investigators repeatedly, organized awareness efforts, and refused to allow their loved ones to be forgotten. Their persistence helped keep the cases alive even when progress appeared limited. The investigation would eventually reveal how easily vulnerable people can disappear from public attention when their lives do not fit society's expectations. That realization later prompted broader conversations about the treatment of missing persons, particularly those involved in sex work, struggling with addiction, or living unstable lives. By the end of the decade, no one knew that these separate tragedies were connected by geography. No one knew that a search for one missing woman would soon uncover evidence that transformed local missing person investigations into an international news story. The landscape had remained silent for years. That silence was about to end. Before this became a story about an investigation, before headlines, press conferences, court filings, and forensic evidence, it was a story about people. The names that would eventually become known across the United States did not first appear in police reports. They appeared on birth certificates, school records, family photo albums, handwritten birthday cards, and holiday snapshots tucked away in living room cabinets. They belonged to daughters whose parents once imagined ordinary futures for them, to sisters who shared childhood bedrooms, to mothers who held their own children, and to friends who were remembered not for how they died, but for how they laughed. One of the most important lessons from this case is that the victims were far more than the circumstances that surrounded their disappearances. For years, public discussion often focused on their occupations or personal struggles. Yet those details represented only fragments of lives that were far richer and more complicated than any headline could capture. Among the women whose deaths became central to the investigation were Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Investigators would later refer to them collectively as the Gilgo Four because of the similarities in their disappearances and the location where their remains were discovered. Although each woman's life followed a different path, they shared certain realities. They were young. They faced financial hardship. They had families who loved them. And they disappeared after arranging meetings with clients through online escort advertisements. Those common elements would eventually become crucial to the investigation, but they should never overshadow the individuality of the women themselves. Maureen Brainerd Barnes grew up with dreams and responsibilities much like anyone else. Friends and relatives described someone who cared deeply about her family and wanted stability for her children. Financial pressures weighed heavily on many of her decisions. Like countless people trying to make ends meet, she searched for ways to earn enough money to support those who depended on her. When she stopped communicating, The silence felt wrong almost immediately. People who knew her recognized that disappearing without contacting loved ones was inconsistent with the person they knew. Melissa Barthelemy was remembered by family members as independent and determined. She maintained close relationships with those she loved, even when life became difficult. The challenges she faced did not erase her sense of humor or her hopes for the future. After she disappeared, those closest to her entered the exhausting rhythm familiar to many families of missing persons. They called repeatedly. They checked hospitals. They contacted police. They waited for updates that rarely came. Every unknown phone number became a possibility. Every rumor offered a moment of hope before collapsing under the weight of uncertainty. For Melissa's family, the ordeal became even more traumatic because prosecutors have alleged that someone used her phone after her disappearance to make a series of disturbing calls to a family member. According to investigators, those calls appeared intended to inflict emotional pain rather than provide information. The allegations became one of the most chilling aspects of the case and reinforced investigators' belief that whoever was responsible acted with calculation rather than impulse. Megan Waterman was also remembered as someone whose life contained both challenges and aspirations. Those who knew her described a woman who cared deeply about her family, particularly her young daughter. Like many parents facing financial insecurity, Megan tried to balance immediate needs with hopes for a better future. Her disappearance left questions that seemed impossible to answer. Children often experience loss differently from adults. They may not fully understand what has happened, but they recognize absence. Birthdays arrive. Holidays pass. School events come and go. Someone who was supposed to be there never comes home. That quiet absence can shape an entire childhood. Amber Lynn Costello's story reflected many of the same complexities. Family members remembered ordinary moments that became extraordinarily precious after she disappeared. Conversations that once seemed routine became memories replayed again and again. Small disagreements became sources of regret. Simple acts of kindness became impossible to forget. This pattern appears repeatedly in missing person cases. Families rarely remember the last conversation because they know it will be the last. Instead, they remember it afterward. They remember words spoken in haste. Promises to call tomorrow. Plans for next week. Ordinary moments suddenly transformed into permanent memories. As investigators later examined the similarities among the 4 cases, they identified patterns in communication, timing, and circumstances surrounding the disappearances. Those similarities became increasingly significant as forensic evidence and digital records were analyzed years later. At the same time, authorities also recognized an important limitation. Not every set of human remains discovered near Gilgo Beach has been conclusively linked to the same offender. Over the years, investigators recovered the remains of additional individuals in the broader area, and questions have remained about whether all of those deaths are connected or whether multiple offenders may have used the same remote coastline. That distinction is important because criminal investigations depend on evidence rather than assumption. The uncertainty surrounding some of the victims illustrates just how complex the case became. It also highlights another reality. Many families waited years simply to learn the fate of someone they loved. For some, the discovery of remains answered one question while opening countless others. Confirmation brought certainty, but not peace. Knowing what happened is not the same as understanding why. Throughout the years of investigation, advocates for victims emphasized a point that would gradually receive broader public attention. Every missing person deserves the same urgency. Socioeconomic status should not determine investigative priority. Occupation should not determine public sympathy. Personal struggles should not diminish a person's humanity. The Gilgo Beach investigation became part of a wider national conversation about how society responds to cases involving vulnerable victims. Law enforcement agencies across the United States have since devoted increasing attention to improving coordination in missing person investigations, expanding forensic capabilities, and strengthening communication across jurisdictions. Those broader changes cannot erase what happened. But they reflect lessons learned through painful experience. When viewed together, the stories of Maureen, Melissa, Megan, and Amber reveal more than shared tragedy. They reveal resilience. Each woman navigated difficult circumstances while continuing to maintain relationships with people who loved them. Each had hopes that extended beyond the immediate struggles of daily life. Each left behind family members who spent years searching for answers with extraordinary determination. As the investigation continued, detectives worked to reconstruct not only forensic timelines but also the final known movements of each victim. Who did they speak with? What vehicles were seen nearby? Which phone numbers appeared repeatedly? Which digital records survived despite the passage of time? Piece by piece, investigators attempted to bridge the gap between ordinary lives and extraordinary violence. It would prove to be one of the most challenging tasks in modern criminal investigation. Because somewhere between the final phone call and the discovery of evidence lay the unanswered question that haunted everyone involved. Who had crossed paths with these women and managed to disappear into ordinary life afterward? The search for that answer would consume investigators for more than a decade and ultimately reshape one of the largest homicide investigations in New York's history. No one can say with certainty what happened during the final moments of each victim's life. That uncertainty is one of the defining characteristics of the Gilgo Beach investigation. Much of what investigators know has been reconstructed from phone records, witness interviews, digital evidence, forensic findings, and timelines developed years after the disappearances. Where evidence ends, speculation must not begin. What can be established is that, between 2007 and 2010, several young women accepted appointments arranged through online escort advertisements. Like countless previous appointments, these meetings appeared routine on the surface. A phone call was made. A meeting place was agreed upon. Someone expected to earn money and return home. Instead, communication stopped. For families, disappearances rarely begin with panic. They begin with small inconsistencies. A message that goes unanswered. A voicemail that is never returned. A missed appointment. Hours become a day. A day becomes two. Friends begin calling one another, asking the same question. Have you heard from her? At first, every explanation seems possible. Maybe the phone battery died. Maybe she decided to stay with someone. Maybe she simply needed time alone. Hope has a way of filling the empty spaces where facts have not yet arrived. But as more time passes, hope begins to compete with fear. For several of the women later associated with the Gilgo Beach investigation, that fear slowly became impossible to ignore. Family members contacted police. Friends retraced recent conversations. Investigators began assembling timelines from whatever information remained available. The last confirmed communications became increasingly important. Who spoke with them? When? From what phone? Where had those calls originated? In the late 2000s, answering these questions was far more difficult than it would be today. Smartphones were not yet collecting the detailed location data that has since become common. Many communications occurred through prepaid mobile phones, temporary numbers, and online classified advertisements that left limited records. Digital traces existed, but they were fragmented. For investigators, every surviving record mattered. A timestamp. A billing entry. A witness who remembered seeing a vehicle. A forgotten receipt. None of these pieces revealed the full story on their own. Only years later would some of them begin to align. According to prosecutors, the alleged offender took deliberate steps intended to reduce the chances of identification. The charging documents describe the use of prepaid burner phones to communicate with victims before they disappeared. Those devices, purchased without long-term contracts, complicated efforts to identify their user during the early stages of the investigation. If those allegations are ultimately proven in court, they suggest preparation rather than spontaneity. Preparation changes the nature of a crime. It indicates planning. It indicates forethought. It suggests that ordinary interactions may have concealed calculated intent. Investigators have also alleged that the victims were selected through online advertisements, allowing meetings to be arranged privately with minimal personal information exchanged beforehand. To the women, these meetings may have seemed like many others they had accepted before. To the person arranging them, they may have represented something entirely different. Exactly what occurred after those meetings remains unknown. The available evidence does not provide investigators with a complete account of the victim's final hours, and authorities have been careful not to claim certainty where none exists. Instead, detectives relied on the evidence they could establish. The meetings occurred. The women disappeared. Communication ceased. Years later, their remains were recovered. Between those confirmed events lies a period that may never be fully reconstructed. That absence of certainty is deeply frustrating for investigators. In many homicide cases, witnesses observe something unusual. Security cameras capture movement. Physical evidence clearly documents a sequence of events. Here, the Atlantic shoreline and the passage of time erased much of that opportunity. The environment itself worked against investigators. Weather changed. Storms reshaped the landscape. Vegetation grew. Animals disturbed remains. Every passing season reduced the likelihood that fragile evidence would survive. Yet one detail would later draw particular attention. The remains of the 4 women now known as the Jilgo Four were discovered relatively close to one another along Ocean Parkway. According to investigators, each had been wrapped in burlap before being left in the area. That similarity became one of the strongest indicators that the cases might be connected. Whether burlap was chosen because it was readily available, because it delayed discovery, or for another reason has never been publicly established. Investigators focused not on guessing why, but on documenting what the evidence showed. Patterns matter. Not because they explain motive. Because they help establish linkage. As analysts reviewed missing person reports from previous years, similarities gradually emerged. Young women. Comparable circumstances. Online contact before disappearance. The same general disposal area. No single fact solved the case. Together, however, those facts began to form a recognizable investigative picture. While detectives searched for evidence, families lived through an entirely different experience. Every day without answers became another day suspended between hope and grief. Some relatives continued checking social media accounts, wondering whether an unexpected message might appear. Others left phones on throughout the night. Birthdays passed. Anniversaries arrived. Holidays became painful reminders of absence rather than occasions for celebration. For many families of missing persons, uncertainty creates a unique kind of suffering. There is no confirmed goodbye. No clear ending. Only unanswered questions repeated over months and years. As public attention slowly increased, so did awareness of the vulnerabilities faced by individuals working in isolated circumstances. Advocacy organizations emphasized that crimes against people involved in sex work often go underreported and that disappearances may not receive immediate recognition as potential homicides. The Jilgo Beach investigation became part of a broader discussion about ensuring that every missing person receives thorough investigative attention, regardless of occupation or personal history. That conversation continues today. Meanwhile, detectives remained focused on facts. Every recovered item was catalogued. Every interview documented. Every potential witness reconsidered. Some investigative paths ended quickly. Others remained open for years. The case resisted easy explanations. It demanded patience. It demanded precision. Most of all, it demanded persistence. Because somewhere within thousands of pages of reports, scattered digital records, forensic examinations, and witness statements lay the sequence of events that had transformed ordinary appointments into disappearances that would haunt Long Island for more than a decade. The incident itself may never be known in complete detail. But its consequences echoed through every stage of the investigation that followed. The women did not simply vanish. Their absence changed families forever. Their disappearances challenged investigators to solve crimes with limited physical evidence. and they exposed how a series of seemingly unrelated missing person reports could conceal a much larger and more disturbing pattern. The next chapter would begin not with certainty, but with discovery. A search intended to find one missing woman would instead uncover evidence that fundamentally altered the direction of the investigation, revealing that the quiet landscape beside Ocean Parkway had been holding secrets far greater than anyone had imagined. The search that changed everything did not begin as a hunt for a serial killer. It began with the search for one missing woman. In early December 2010, investigators from the Suffolk County Police Department were looking for Shanann Gilbert, a woman who had disappeared months earlier after fleeing from a residence in the nearby community of Oak Beach. Search teams moved through the difficult terrain surrounding Ocean Parkway with one objective: to locate any trace that might explain what had happened to her. The conditions were challenging. The barrier island was covered with dense brush, reeds, thorny vegetation, and uneven ground that made systematic searching slow and physically demanding. Visibility was limited in many areas, even during daylight. Search teams relied on trained cadaver dogs, careful grid searches, and methodical documentation rather than speed. No one involved expected the search to transform into one of the largest homicide investigations in New York's recent history. During the operation, a cadaver dog alerted investigators to human remains hidden within the vegetation. The discovery immediately changed the tone of the search. Experienced investigators know that human remains require careful documentation before anything is moved. Every photograph, every measurement, and every observation may later become important in reconstructing events. The surrounding area was secured, forensic specialists were called, and the recovery process began. As investigators examined the remains, another realization emerged. The body did not belong to Shanann Gilbert. Instead, authorities later identified the victim as Melissa Barthelemy, who had disappeared in 2009. What had begun as one missing person investigation had unexpectedly uncovered evidence of another homicide. The search did not stop. Recognizing the possibility that additional evidence might exist nearby, investigators expanded their examination of the surrounding area. Just days later, another set of human remains was located. Then another. Then another. Within a relatively short stretch along Ocean Parkway, investigators discovered the remains of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. The four women had disappeared over several years. Now, they had been found within the same general area. For detectives, this was no longer a series of isolated investigations. The similarities demanded a broader inquiry. Each recovery operation required extraordinary care. Forensic teams documented the precise location of every discovery. The position of the remains, nearby vegetation, environmental conditions, and any associated material were recorded in detail. Investigators understood that once evidence was removed from the scene, the original context could never be recreated. The geography itself presented significant obstacles. The area had been exposed to years of changing weather. Powerful coastal storms had altered the landscape. Seasonal flooding affected parts of the marsh. Salt air accelerated natural deterioration. Wildlife had disturbed portions of the remains. All of these factors complicated forensic analysis. Despite those challenges, investigators observed notable similarities among the four victims. According to authorities, each had been wrapped in burlap before being left in the area. That consistent method became one of the strongest early indicators that the deaths might be connected. Importantly, investigators focused on documenting evidence rather than reaching immediate conclusions about motive or offender identity. As news of the discoveries spread, public attention intensified rapidly. The image of a quiet coastal highway suddenly took on an entirely different meaning. Television crews gathered near Ocean Parkway. National media organizations began reporting from Long Island. Residents who had driven the road countless times struggled to understand how multiple victims could have remained hidden so close to everyday traffic. The discoveries also transformed the work of law enforcement. Instead of investigating individual disappearances, detectives now faced the possibility of a serial offender. That possibility required a different investigative approach. Case files that had once been handled separately were reviewed together. Investigators compared timelines. Phone records were revisited. Witness interviews were re-examined. Digital evidence that had seemed insignificant in one investigation might prove meaningful when viewed alongside another. The search continued beyond the initial discoveries. Over the following months, investigators recovered additional human remains in the broader Jilgo Beach area. Some belonged to individuals whose disappearances dated back years. Others required extensive forensic analysis before identification could even begin. These discoveries added considerable complexity to the investigation. Authorities have consistently stated that not all of the remains recovered near Jilgo Beach have been conclusively linked to the same offender. Some cases may be connected. Others may not. That distinction remains important because criminal investigations depend on evidence rather than assumption. Each victim deserved an independent and thorough examination. The growing number of discoveries also placed increasing demands on forensic specialists. Anthropologists, pathologists, crime scene analysts, and investigators worked together to identify remains, establish timelines where possible, and determine whether individual cases shared common characteristics. Modern forensic science can reveal remarkable information from human remains, but it also has limits, particularly when evidence has been exposed to the environment for extended periods. Some questions simply could not be answered immediately. Meanwhile, families watched every press conference with a mixture of hope and dread. For relatives of missing persons, the discovery of unidentified remains creates an impossible emotional conflict. They desperately want answers. They also fear what those answers may be. Every announcement became another moment of uncertainty. Every identification brought closure for one family while reminding countless others that they were still waiting. Investigators understood that public confidence depended upon careful communication. They resisted drawing conclusions before evidence supported them. Although similarities between several victims were apparent, establishing legal connections required extensive forensic work. That process would take years. The discoveries also exposed the extraordinary difficulty of searching remote environments. If investigators had not been looking for Shannon Gilbert in December 2010, the remains of the Jilgo Four might have remained hidden much longer. This fact has often been noted in discussions of the case. It illustrates how chance can sometimes intersect with determined investigative work. A search intended for one purpose unexpectedly revealed something far larger. As evidence accumulated, one question increasingly dominated the investigation. Who had placed the victims there? The location itself suggested familiarity. The remains had been left in areas concealed by vegetation yet accessible from the roadway. Whether that reflected local knowledge, repeated visits, or another explanation would become a central focus of the investigation. Crime analysts began examining geographic patterns. Investigators reviewed missing person timelines. Specialists considered whether the disposal locations revealed anything about the offender's movements or level of planning. These analyses did not produce immediate answers, but they helped shape future investigative strategies. The discoveries along Ocean Parkway marked a turning point unlike any the case had seen before. Before December 2010, investigators were searching for missing individuals. After December 2010, they were confronting the possibility that multiple homicides had remained undetected for years. The scale of the investigation changed overnight. Resources expanded. Specialized personnel were assigned. National attention intensified. Yet despite the dramatic discoveries, identifying a suspect proved far more difficult than locating the crime scenes themselves. The coastline had yielded victims. It had not yielded the person responsible. That challenge would define the next phase of the investigation. Years would pass. Thousands of investigative leads would be pursued. Advances in DNA analysis, digital forensics, and cell phone data would eventually reshape the case. But in the weeks immediately following the discoveries, detectives stood at the beginning of an investigation whose true complexity they had only begun to understand. The shoreline had finally given up some of its secrets. The identity of the person who placed them there remained hidden. By the beginning of 2011, the investigation had grown far beyond anything Suffolk County detectives had anticipated only weeks earlier. The discoveries along Ocean Parkway had transformed a missing person search into a sprawling homicide investigation involving multiple victims, numerous agencies, and an ever-expanding collection of evidence. Detectives faced a daunting challenge: determine whether the deaths were connected, identify the offender if they were, and do so with crime scenes that had been exposed to the elements for years. Unlike many homicide investigations, there was no obvious starting point. No eyewitness had reported seeing bodies being left along the roadside. No surveillance cameras captured the disposal sites. No murder weapon had been recovered. No suspect had immediately emerged from the evidence. Instead, investigators were confronted with thousands of individual pieces of information that, on their own, appeared ordinary. Phone records, witness interviews, financial transactions, vehicle descriptions, maps, employment histories, cell tower connections, online advertisements. Every document represented another fragment of a much larger puzzle. One of the first priorities was determining whether the 4 women now known as the Jilgo Four had indeed been killed by the same person. The similarities were compelling. Each had disappeared after arranging meetings through online escort advertisements. Each vanished between 2007 and 2010. Each was later found in the same general area near Jilgo Beach. According to investigators, each had been wrapped in burlap before being left at the scene. These similarities strongly suggested a common offender, but investigators needed evidence that could withstand scrutiny in court. Patterns alone do not prove guilt. They guide investigations. They point detectives toward questions that still require answers. At the same time, investigators had to address another difficult issue. Additional human remains had also been discovered in the broader search area. Some belonged to victims whose disappearances predated the Jilgo Four by several years. Others were initially unidentified. Determining whether these cases were connected or represented separate crimes committed by different offenders became one of the most complex aspects of the investigation. Law enforcement officials consistently cautioned against assuming every victim found near Ocean Parkway had been killed by the same individual. Geographic proximity alone was not enough. Each case required its own forensic analysis, timeline, and evidentiary review. That careful approach reflected an important principle of criminal investigation. Conclusions must follow evidence, not the other way around. As the investigation expanded, detectives reviewed thousands of missing person reports from New York and neighboring states. They searched for common characteristics, victim profiles, methods of communication, known associates, travel patterns, anything that might reveal another connection. Some leads appeared promising before eventually being ruled out. Others remained open for years. The volume of information became overwhelming. Every potential clue required verification. Every witness statement needed corroboration. Every new theory had to be tested against the available evidence. Public attention intensified with each passing month. Media coverage introduced a flood of tips from across the country. Some callers believed they had seen suspicious vehicles. Others suggested possible suspects. A number of individuals contacted investigators claiming responsibility for the murders, only for those confessions to collapse under examination. False confessions are an unfortunate reality in major criminal investigations. Whether motivated by mental illness, a desire for attention, or other reasons, they consume valuable investigative time. Detectives were forced to distinguish between information that merely sounded convincing and information supported by objective evidence. Meanwhile, another challenge emerged from within the investigation itself. The case involved multiple law enforcement agencies with overlapping responsibilities. Coordinating information across departments required significant effort. As years passed, leadership changes and institutional difficulties further complicated the investigation. Observers later criticized aspects of the early investigative process, arguing that communication and coordination could have been stronger. Those criticisms became part of the public discussion surrounding the case, although investigators continued working individual leads throughout this period. Technology also presented limitations. Today, investigators routinely analyze smartphones capable of recording extensive location histories, internet activity, and digital communications. During the late 2000s, however, much of that information either did not exist or was far less comprehensive. Many communications occurred through prepaid phones. Online classified advertisements often contained limited identifying information. Some digital records were no longer available by the time investigators recognized their significance. As a result, detectives frequently worked backward from incomplete records. A phone number might appear briefly in one report. A vehicle description might surface in another. Neither seemed significant alone. Together, they sometimes suggested a possible avenue for further investigation. The work demanded extraordinary patience. Years passed without a breakthrough. For the families of the victims, the passage of time became another source of pain. Anniversaries came and went. Children grew older. Parents aged. Every major holiday served as another reminder that the people they loved were still absent. Many families continued speaking publicly about the investigation, hoping renewed attention might encourage witnesses to come forward. Some advocates also urged broader reforms in the handling of missing person cases involving vulnerable individuals. The Gilgo Beach investigation highlighted concerns that disappearances involving sex workers or people living unstable lives might not always receive the same immediate public attention as other cases. While law enforcement agencies emphasized that every missing person report was taken seriously, the case nevertheless contributed to important conversations about investigative priorities and public perception. Behind the scenes, investigators steadily refined their understanding of the offender they were seeking. Crime analysts examined geographic patterns associated with the disposal sites. Behavioral specialists considered what the available evidence might suggest about the offender's familiarity with Long Island. Investigators explored whether the individual responsible could have lived nearby, worked nearby, or traveled the area regularly. These analyses generated investigative hypotheses rather than definitive conclusions. Behavioral profiling can help organize investigative thinking, but it does not identify a suspect by itself. Evidence remains essential. As forensic science advanced during the following decade, evidence that had once seemed exhausted acquired new potential. DNA analysis became increasingly sensitive. Hair examination techniques improved. Digital mapping technologies evolved. Cell site analysis grew more sophisticated. Information collected years earlier could now be examined using methods unavailable when the investigation first began. Investigators also revisited older interviews. People remember details differently over time. Someone who once dismissed an observation as unimportant may later recognize its significance after additional information becomes public. Cold cases often benefit from this process. Distance can change perspective. New evidence can transform forgotten memories into valuable leads. Despite these advances, the identity of the offender remained unknown. Public frustration continued to grow. Questions multiplied. How could someone commit multiple murders without being identified? How had the disposal sites remained undiscovered for so long? Could the offender still be living an ordinary life? Those questions reflected the unsettling reality of the investigation. The crimes, as alleged, appeared to have been committed by someone capable of blending into everyday society. That possibility challenged assumptions about what dangerous offenders look like. Many serial offenders do not outwardly appear extraordinary. They may hold steady employment, maintain relationships, participate in ordinary routines. The contrast between alleged criminal behavior and public appearance has been observed in numerous criminal investigations, reminding investigators to focus on evidence rather than expectation. As the investigation entered its second decade, some observers feared it might never be solved. Cold cases often become progressively more difficult over time. Witnesses relocate. Memories fade. Records disappear. Physical evidence deteriorates. Yet advances in science sometimes reverse that trend. Evidence once considered insufficient may later reveal entirely new information. That possibility gave investigators reason to continue. Boxes of files remained open. Digital records were preserved. Forensic samples were retained. Nothing was discarded simply because years had passed. Then, more than a decade after the first discoveries near Gilgo Beach, the investigation entered a new phase. Fresh leadership brought renewed focus. Modern forensic techniques were applied to evidence collected years earlier. Cellular data, vehicle information, and genetic evidence were examined together in ways that had not previously been possible. The investigation that once seemed stalled began moving again. For the first time in years, investigators believed they were no longer searching for an unknown figure hidden somewhere within millions of people. They believed they were moving steadily toward one identifiable individual. The breakthrough would not arrive through a single dramatic discovery. It would emerge through the careful combination of old evidence and new technology, demonstrating that in some investigations, time does not simply erase answers. Sometimes, given the right tools and enough persistence, time helps reveal them. For more than a decade, the name of the person responsible for the Gilgo Beach murders remained unknown. The investigation had survived through changing seasons, changing leadership, public criticism, and years of unanswered questions. Detectives had collected thousands of pages of reports. Forensic specialists had examined evidence under the limitations of the technology available at the time. Families had waited through birthdays, anniversaries, and long stretches of silence. The case had become one of the most recognizable cold cases in America. But cold did not mean forgotten. Behind the scenes, investigators continued searching for the piece of evidence that could transform suspicion into proof. That evidence would eventually come from the combination of modern forensic science and a renewed examination of old information. The breakthrough did not happen because of one miraculous discovery. It happened because investigators began looking at the evidence differently. By the early 2020s, forensic technology had advanced significantly compared with the tools available when the bodies were first discovered. DNA analysis had become more precise. Digital records had become more detailed. Investigators could examine patterns in communication, movement, and online activity with a level of accuracy that would have been impossible years earlier. Evidence that once appeared incomplete could now be placed into a larger picture. One of the most important developments involved genetic evidence. During the original investigation, forensic teams had recovered biological material connected to the victims. However, obtaining a clear identification from limited or degraded samples was extremely challenging. Years later, improved testing methods allowed investigators to revisit evidence that had remained unresolved. The goal was simple. Find a connection. Find a name. Find the person who could explain how these women disappeared. According to prosecutors, investigators eventually developed a connection between evidence recovered from the victims and a man named Rex Heuermann, an architect living in Massapequa Park, Long Island. At first glance, his public identity appeared far removed from the image many people associate with a violent offender. He was a professional, a businessman, a husband, a father. Someone who had lived in the same community for years. People who knew him described a man who maintained a normal public presence. He owned an architecture firm and worked with clients. He lived in a suburban neighborhood where ordinary routines continued day after day. The contrast between that public image and the allegations against him became one of the most shocking elements of the case. Investigators, however, were not looking for a personality. They were looking for evidence. And according to court documents, they began building a case using multiple forms of information. One significant piece involved DNA evidence. Authorities have alleged that a hair recovered from one victim was linked through forensic testing to Heuermann. Investigators also collected additional genetic material during their investigation to compare against evidence connected to the crimes. DNA evidence can be powerful, but it is rarely interpreted in isolation. Investigators examined it alongside other information. Phone records, vehicle records, digital activity, historical data. Together, these pieces formed the foundation of the case presented by prosecutors. Another major element involved telecommunications records. Years earlier, investigators had struggled with the limitations of phone technology. But by the time the renewed investigation began, cell phone data analysis had become far more advanced. According to prosecutors, records connected Huerman to areas relevant to the victims' disappearances. Investigators examined patterns of communication, locations associated with devices, and the use of prepaid phones that prosecutors allege were connected to contact with victims. The idea that a person could use technology to hide their identity had changed. Now, technology was being used to uncover identity. The same digital world that created opportunities for anonymous communication had also created traces that could survive for years. Investigators also examined online activity. According to allegations made by prosecutors, digital searches connected to Huerman included material related to violent crimes and the investigation itself. Such evidence became part of the broader case against him. However, as with all criminal allegations, the evidence presented by prosecutors must ultimately be tested through the legal process. An accusation is not a conviction. A courtroom, not public opinion, determines guilt. In July 2023, the investigation reached the moment families had waited for more than 13 years. Authorities arrested Rex Huerman outside his Manhattan office. The arrest was not carried out in a dramatic confrontation. There was no public chase. No violent encounter. Instead, investigators approached a man who had spent years living an apparently ordinary life and informed him that he was being accused of some of the most serious crimes in the region's history. For many people watching the news that day, the most unsettling question was not only who he was. It was how long he had remained unidentified. Neighbors expressed shock. People who had walked past him, worked with him, or interacted with him struggled to reconcile the accusations with the person they believed they knew. That reaction has appeared repeatedly throughout history when alleged offenders are arrested after years of avoiding detection. The human mind searches for warning signs. It wants to believe dangerous individuals look dangerous. But many investigations reveal a much more complicated reality. A person accused of extraordinary crimes may appear completely ordinary in everyday settings. The arrest also brought renewed attention to the victims. For years, the investigation had often been discussed through the mystery of the unknown killer. After the arrest, families and advocates emphasized that the women should remain at the center of the story. They were not simply evidence. They were not simply names in a case file. They were people whose lives mattered before their deaths. The arrest provided movement in the investigation, but it did not answer every question. Authorities continued examining whether other victims might be connected. The broader Gilgo Beach area contained unresolved mysteries. Additional remains had been discovered over the years, and investigators continued determining which cases could be linked and which might involve separate circumstances. The arrest also marked the beginning of a new legal process. Rex Huerman was charged in connection with multiple killings and pleaded not guilty. The allegations would now move from an investigative setting into a courtroom, where prosecutors would be required to present evidence and the defense would have the opportunity to challenge it. For the families, the arrest represented a moment they had waited years to see. But it also carried complicated emotions. Justice in a case like this is not a single moment. An arrest does not erase grief. A court hearing does not restore lost years. A verdict cannot bring someone back. The damage caused by the disappearances had already changed countless lives forever. Still, the breakthrough represented something that had once seemed almost impossible. After 13 years of uncertainty, investigators finally had a suspect. The silence surrounding Gilgo Beach had been broken. The question was no longer, who did this? The question became, can the evidence prove what investigators believe happened? That question would now be answered not on the roads of Long Island, not in hidden marshes, and not inside investigative offices filled with old case files. It would be answered in a courtroom, where evidence would be examined, where witnesses would speak, where years of investigation would face its ultimate test, and where the victims, after years of waiting, would finally have their story heard. For 13 years, the families of the Gilgo Beach victims lived with a question that had no answer. Who was responsible? It was a question that followed them through ordinary moments. During holidays. During family gatherings. During quiet nights when memories returned without warning. For more than a decade, they carried grief without the certainty that a suspect would ever be identified. They knew their loved ones had been taken from them, but they did not know who had done it or whether that person was still living among them. Then, in July 2023, everything changed. The arrest of Rex Heuermann marked the beginning of a new chapter. But an arrest was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a legal battle where every piece of evidence, every timeline, and every investigative decision would be examined under the strict standards of a courtroom. In the United States justice system, suspicion is not enough. A person can be accused. A person can be investigated. A person can be arrested. But guilt must be proven through evidence presented in court. That principle became especially important in a case that had captured worldwide attention. The public had already formed opinions. The media had already examined every detail. But inside the courtroom, the process moved differently. Slowly. Carefully. One piece of evidence at a time. After his arrest, Rex Heuermann appeared in court and faced multiple charges related to the deaths of the Gilgo Four. Prosecutors alleged that he was responsible for the murders of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Heuermann pleaded not guilty. His defense team challenged the allegations and emphasized that accusations alone could not determine the outcome. The courtroom became the place where two very different narratives would meet. The prosecution argued that years of investigation had uncovered a pattern connecting Heuermann to the crimes. They presented a case built around forensic evidence, digital records, and investigative analysis. According to prosecutors, DNA evidence was among the most significant elements. They alleged that genetic material recovered during the investigation connected Heuermann to evidence associated with the victims. Forensic science has transformed criminal investigations over the past several decades. A microscopic trace that once held little value can now provide important information through advanced laboratory techniques. However, DNA evidence is not interpreted in isolation. Experts must explain how samples were collected, how testing was conducted, and what conclusions can reasonably be drawn. Every step matters. The defense would have the opportunity to question those conclusions, examine the methodology, and present alternative explanations where appropriate. Another major element of the prosecution's case involved digital evidence. The investigation had taken place across two different technological eras. When the victims disappeared, investigators faced limitations with phone records, online communication, and location data. By the time Heuermann became a suspect, technology had advanced dramatically. Investigators could analyze information that previously would have been impossible to recover or interpret. According to prosecutors, phone records connected to devices allegedly used during the crimes helped establish links between Heuermann and the victims. They also alleged that certain digital searches and online activities were relevant to understanding his behavior and possible involvement. These details attracted enormous public attention because they represented a modern reality of criminal investigation. Today, people leave digital footprints everywhere. Phone locations, internet searches, online purchases, communication records. Technology has created new opportunities for offenders to hide, but it has also created new ways for investigators to follow evidence. The prosecution also focused on the alleged planning involved in the crimes. They argued that the use of prepaid phones, online advertisements, and the selection of secluded disposal locations indicated preparation and an attempt to avoid detection. The location along Ocean Parkway became an important part of that argument. The area was not chosen randomly, prosecutors suggested. Its isolation and familiarity may have provided advantages to someone seeking concealment. The defense, however, would have the responsibility of challenging these interpretations. In any criminal trial, evidence must be examined from multiple perspectives. A phone record may show that a device was present in an area. It does not automatically explain who used it or why. A piece of physical evidence may establish a connection. It must still be interpreted within the complete context of the case. This process is what separates investigation from conviction. The courtroom requires patience. It requires proof. And it requires every claim to survive examination. Beyond the legal arguments, the proceedings carried enormous emotional weight for the families of the victims. For them, the case was never simply about evidence. It was about people. Maureen, Melissa, Megan, Amber. Each name represented a person whose absence changed the lives of those who loved them. Their families had already endured years of uncertainty. The arrest brought relief, but also reopened painful memories. For many families of homicide victims, justice is complicated. A courtroom cannot undo what happened. A verdict cannot restore lost time. No legal outcome can erase the empty spaces left behind. But accountability matters. The possibility that the person responsible could be identified and held responsible represents something families often describe as a necessary step toward healing. The case also renewed discussion about how society treats vulnerable victims. Many of the women connected to the Gilgo investigation were involved in sex work at the time of their disappearances. Their occupations became a major part of public discussion, but advocates repeatedly emphasized that their work should never determine the value placed on their lives. The investigation revealed how easily vulnerable people can disappear from public attention. It raised questions about resources for missing person cases, communication between law enforcement agencies, and whether some victims receive the same urgency and public concern as others. These conversations became part of the larger legacy of the case. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining whether additional crimes might be connected to Huerman. The arrest answered one major question, but it created many others. Was he responsible for only the charged crimes? Were there other victims? Could additional evidence be uncovered? Cold cases often continue evolving even after an arrest. New witnesses may come forward. Additional forensic testing may reveal information. Old records may take on new meaning. The investigation remains active because the search for complete answers does not end with one suspect. The courtroom process also represented something larger. For years, the Gilgo Beach victims existed in a painful space between disappearance and recognition. Their families knew who they were. But the wider world knew only fragments. A headline. A photograph. A missing person report. The investigation and subsequent arrest brought renewed focus to their lives and reminded the public that behind every cold case file is a human story. The women were not defined by the tragedy that ended their lives. They were defined by the years before it. The people who loved them. The memories they created. The futures they should have had. As the legal process continued, the central question remained the same. Could the evidence collected over more than a decade finally establish the truth? The answer would depend on what happened inside the courtroom. Not on rumors. Not on public assumptions. Not on the passage of time. Only on evidence. Because justice is not simply finding someone to blame. Justice is the careful pursuit of truth. And after 13 years of searching, the families of Gilgo Beach were finally closer than ever to receiving the answers they had spent so long waiting for. The ocean has a way of making everything seem temporary. Waves erase footprints. Wind moves sand from one place to another. Storms reshape the coastline overnight. But some things refuse to disappear. Some memories remain. Some names continue to be spoken. The story of Gilgo Beach is not only the story of a criminal investigation. It is also the story of the people left behind, the families who waited, the investigators who refused to stop searching, and the victims whose lives became known to the world only after they were taken away. For more than a decade, the stretch of coastline along Ocean Parkway represented unanswered questions. To strangers, it was simply a road beside the Atlantic. To the families of the victims, it became a symbol of everything they had lost. A place where their loved ones' stories had been interrupted. A place where the search for truth continued long after hope had become painful to carry. The arrest of Rex Heuermann in 2023 marked a significant moment in the investigation, but it did not erase the years that came before it. 13 years is a long time. Children grew older. Parents aged. Relationships changed. Lives continued moving forward while a piece of the past remained frozen. For families of homicide victims, time does not move normally. The world continues, but grief creates its own calendar. A birthday becomes a reminder. A holiday becomes a question. A familiar song can bring back a memory from years earlier with incredible clarity. The people left behind often live with two realities at once. They continue living. But they also continue waiting. Waiting for answers. Waiting for accountability. Waiting for the moment when they can finally say that the person responsible has been found. The Gilgo Beach investigation also changed the way many people viewed missing person cases involving vulnerable individuals. For years, advocates had warned that certain victims receive less attention because of their occupation, personal struggles, or social circumstances. The women connected to Gilgo Beach challenged that perception. Their lives mattered. Their stories mattered. Their disappearances deserved urgency from the beginning. The investigation became a reminder that every missing person represents someone important to someone else. A missing person is never just a photograph on a poster. Behind every image is a family waiting for a phone call. A friend remembering a conversation. A person who once had plans for tomorrow. The case also revealed the evolving nature of criminal investigations. When the first discoveries were made in 2010, investigators faced enormous obstacles. Technology had limits. Evidence had deteriorated. Years had passed. The chances of identifying a suspect appeared increasingly uncertain. Yet the investigation demonstrated how modern forensic science can transform cold cases. DNA analysis, digital records, cell phone data, and improved investigative techniques allowed detectives to revisit old evidence with new possibilities. The evidence had not changed. The questions had not changed. But the tools had. That difference became one of the most important lessons of the investigation. A case that appears unsolvable today may look very different tomorrow. Science continues to evolve. Technology continues to advance. And evidence once considered impossible to interpret may eventually reveal answers. However, technology alone did not solve Gilgo Beach. Behind every discovery were people. Detectives who reviewed old files. Forensic specialists who examined tiny pieces of evidence. Analysts who searched through enormous amounts of information. Families who continued speaking the names of their loved ones when the world had moved on to other stories. Cold cases are often described as puzzles. But that description can sometimes feel incomplete. A puzzle is an object. A case is about people. Every piece of evidence represents a moment in someone's life. Every photograph represents someone who existed beyond the investigation. Every report represents a person who had dreams, fears, relationships, and memories. That perspective is especially important in cases involving victims whose lives are often reduced to the circumstances surrounding their deaths. The women connected to Gilgo Beach were more than victims. They were individuals. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was more than a missing person report. Melissa Barthélemy was more than evidence in an investigation. Megan Waterman was more than a name in a courtroom. Amber Lynn Costello was more than a headline. They were human beings whose lives contained experiences that continued beyond the tragedy that ended them. Remembering that is part of what justice means. The investigation also left unanswered questions. Not every mystery surrounding the Gilgo Beach remains has been resolved. Authorities continue examining whether additional victims may be connected. Some discoveries in the area remain subjects of investigation. The full story of what happened along Ocean Parkway may not yet be complete. That uncertainty is difficult. For families still seeking answers, an arrest may represent progress, but it does not necessarily represent closure. Closure is a complicated word. Some families never truly experience it. They learn to live with the absence. They create ways to remember. They carry their loved ones forward. The justice system can determine responsibility. It can establish facts. It can provide accountability. But it cannot restore what was taken. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the Jilgo Beach case is not the identity of one suspect or the details of one investigation. Perhaps it is the reminder that people who disappear should never become invisible. That every missing person deserves attention. That every family deserves answers. That vulnerability should never become a reason for someone to be ignored. Along the shoreline where the remains were discovered, the ocean continues its endless movement. The same waves that touched the sand years ago still return today. The same wind moves through the grass. The same road carries vehicles past the place where so many questions began. But the meaning of that landscape has changed forever. It is no longer only a location on a map. It is a reminder. A reminder of lives lost. A reminder of families who endured unimaginable uncertainty. A reminder of investigators who continued searching when answers seemed impossible. And a reminder that even after years of silence, the truth can still emerge. The story of Jilgo Beach remains unfinished in many ways. Legal proceedings continue. Questions remain. The investigation continues. But the names of the victims are no longer hidden inside case files. They are remembered. They are spoken. They are part of a story that the world cannot ignore. Because in the end, the most important part of any true crime story is not the person who caused the harm. It is the people who deserved better. The people who should have had more time. More memories. More ordinary days. The ocean may continue to erase footprints from the shore. But it cannot erase the lives that were lived. And it cannot erase the responsibility to remember. Every investigation eventually reaches a moment when the world expects a simple ending. A suspect is arrested. A courtroom process begins. Evidence is presented. People wait for a final answer. But some cases refuse to become simple. The Jilgo Beach investigation is one of those cases. For more than 13 years, investigators searched for the person responsible for a series of deaths that had remained hidden along the coastline of Long Island. The arrest of Rex Heuermann represented a major breakthrough, a moment many families had spent years hoping would arrive. But an arrest does not automatically answer every question. In some ways, it creates new ones. The most important question remains one that has followed the investigation from the beginning. Was one person responsible for every victim discovered near Jilgo Beach? Or did the coastline hold the evidence of more than one tragedy? When investigators first discovered human remains along Ocean Parkway, the similarities between several victims immediately suggested a possible connection. The location. The circumstances. The method of disposal. The timeline. These patterns led investigators to believe that at least some of the cases were connected. However, the broader Jilgo Beach area contained multiple sets of remains, and authorities have repeatedly emphasized that not every victim discovered there has been conclusively linked to the same offender. That distinction is not a minor detail. It represents one of the most difficult challenges in the entire investigation. A location can connect cases geographically. Evidence must connect them legally. For investigators, every victim represents a separate story that must be examined carefully. Every life lost requires its own search for truth. Among the unresolved questions is whether there may be additional victims who have never been discovered. Serial offenders sometimes leave patterns that investigators only recognize after years of examination. A disappearance that once appeared unrelated may later become significant when new information emerges. For this reason, investigators continue reviewing old cases. Missing person reports. Unsolved homicides. Unidentified remains. The work is slow and often invisible. It rarely produces dramatic moments like those shown in movies. Instead, it involves thousands of hours of reviewing documents, comparing records, and looking for connections hidden beneath years of information. Another unanswered question concerns the full extent of the evidence. The arrest of Rex Heuermann was based on evidence gathered through a lengthy investigation, including forensic and digital information that prosecutors say connects him to the crimes. But investigators continue examining whether additional evidence exists. Technology has transformed cold case investigations. A piece of evidence collected years ago may hold information that was impossible to extract at the time. DNA testing continues to improve. Digital analysis continues to evolve. Old records can sometimes reveal new patterns. The passage of time, which once appeared to protect offenders, can sometimes become the reason they are eventually identified. Another question that has surrounded the case involves the possibility of witnesses. In many criminal investigations, someone knows something. A neighbor may remember an unusual vehicle. A coworker may recall strange behavior. A friend may remember a conversation that seemed meaningless at the time. The difficulty is that people often do not recognize the importance of what they know until years later. Memory changes. Details fade. People move away. Life continues. Investigators working cold cases often depend on the possibility that someone who remained silent for years may eventually decide to speak. Sometimes it happens because new evidence emerges. Sometimes because public attention returns. Sometimes because a person realizes that a small detail they once ignored may matter. The question of motive also remains deeply complex. Understanding why a crime occurred is one of the hardest tasks in criminal investigation. Evidence can reveal actions. It can establish timelines. It can connect people to places. But understanding the thoughts and motivations behind those actions is far more difficult. Even when investigators build a strong case, the inner world of an offender may remain partially unknown. This uncertainty is common in cases involving serial violence. The public often searches for a clear explanation. A childhood event. A psychological label. A single moment that created a criminal. But human behavior rarely follows such a simple path. Researchers who study violent offenders often emphasize that multiple factors can interact over time. Personality. Opportunity. Environment. Choices. Personal history. None of these factors excuse criminal actions. They simply reflect the complexity of understanding them. The Gilgo Beach case also leaves broader questions about society itself. How were these women viewed while they were alive? How quickly were their disappearances taken seriously? Would the investigation have unfolded differently if the victims had lived different lives? These questions are uncomfortable because they extend beyond one suspect or one investigation. They challenge how society responds to vulnerable people. A person's occupation, financial situation, or personal struggles should never determine the value placed on their life. The victims of Gilgo Beach were not important because they became part of a famous investigation. They were important because they existed. They had families. They had memories. They had futures that were taken away. That is why their stories remain central. Not because of the mystery surrounding their deaths, but because of the lives that came before. As the legal process continues, many people will watch for answers. Some will focus on evidence. Some will focus on the suspect. Some will focus on the unanswered questions that remain. But for the families, the meaning of justice is often more personal. Justice means that their loved ones are remembered. Justice means that their names are not forgotten. Justice means that the years of searching were not meaningless. The road along Ocean Parkway remains. The Atlantic continues to rise and fall with the tides. The landscape that once concealed secrets now stands as a place associated with questions, investigation, and remembrance. But perhaps the greatest lesson from Gilgo Beach is not about how long a mystery can last. It is about how long people can continue searching for the truth. More than a decade passed before investigators identified a suspect. More than a decade passed while families waited. More than a decade passed while evidence sat quietly, waiting for technology and persistence to bring it back into focus. The case reminds us that time can hide the truth. But time can also reveal it. And until every question is answered, until every possible connection is examined, and until every victim receives the recognition they deserve, the story of Gilgo Beach remains unfinished. Not because the investigation failed, but because the search for truth continues. Some investigations end when a suspect is identified. Others continue long after the headlines disappear. The Gilgo Beach investigation belongs to the second category. Even after the arrest of Rex Heuermann, the case remained larger than one person. It became a reflection of how society investigates missing people, how technology changes the pursuit of justice, and how unresolved cases can remain alive for generations when someone refuses to stop searching. 4 years. The investigation was defined by uncertainty. Detectives had victims, but not an offender. They had locations, but few answers. They had evidence, but not enough to reveal the person behind it. The case became a symbol of the difficulties faced by investigators working cold cases. Time creates distance. Witnesses forget details. Records disappear. Physical evidence deteriorates. The world moves forward while investigators remain focused on the past. But the Gilgo Beach investigation also demonstrated something equally important. Time can work against investigators. But time can also create new opportunities. The difference lies in persistence. When the first remains were discovered in 2010, investigators relied on the forensic tools available at that moment. Some evidence could be collected and preserved, but technology had limits. Years later, those same pieces of evidence could be viewed differently. The development of more advanced DNA analysis changed the possibilities of cold case investigations across the world. A microscopic trace that once provided little information could later become a critical connection. A record that once appeared meaningless could reveal a pattern when combined with new technology. A forgotten detail could become the missing piece. The Gilgo Beach case became an example of how modern investigations are increasingly built through the combination of multiple information sources. No single discovery solved the case. Instead, investigators assembled a picture from thousands of smaller pieces. A phone record. A genetic sample. A digital trail. A vehicle history. A timeline. Each element contributed to a larger understanding. This approach represents a major change in criminal investigations. In the past, many cases depended heavily on eyewitnesses or physical evidence recovered shortly after a crime occurred. Today, investigators often work with enormous amounts of digital information. Phones record movement. Online activity leaves traces. Electronic systems preserve details of everyday behavior. The same technology that creates new opportunities for people to hide their actions also creates new ways for investigators to uncover them. However, technology is not a replacement for human investigation. Behind every database search is a person asking the right question. Behind every forensic result is someone interpreting what it means. Behind every solved case are investigators willing to return to evidence that others may have already considered exhausted. The Gilgo Beach investigation required that kind of determination. Detectives reviewed old reports. They examined previous assumptions. They reconsidered information collected years earlier. They searched for connections that had remained invisible because the pieces had never been placed together. Cold case work requires humility. Investigators must accept that earlier conclusions may have been incomplete. They must be willing to ask new questions about old evidence. They must understand that the absence of an answer does not always mean the answer does not exist. Sometimes it means the right method has not yet been found. The case also changed conversations about missing persons. For decades, advocates have warned that some victims receive less attention because of their background, occupation, or personal circumstances. The Gilgo Beach victims became part of a larger discussion about how society recognizes vulnerability. A person does not become less worthy of protection because of the challenges they face. A disappearance should not be judged by the life someone lived. It should be investigated because a life has been interrupted. That message became one of the most important consequences of the case. The investigation also highlighted the importance of cooperation between agencies. Complex crimes often cross boundaries. Victims may live in one location, disappear in another, and leave evidence across multiple jurisdictions. No single department always has the complete picture. Sharing information becomes essential. The Gilgo Beach investigation demonstrated both the challenges and the importance of coordination between law enforcement agencies, forensic experts, and investigators from different backgrounds. Every unsolved case carries a danger. The danger that people become numbers. That victims become statistics. That years passing causes public attention to disappear. But the Gilgo Beach investigation showed the importance of remembering the human side of criminal cases. Behind every forensic report was a person. Behind every evidence photograph was a life. Behind every missing person file was a family waiting. The women connected to Gilgo Beach became known because of the tragedy surrounding their deaths. But their identities existed long before the investigation. They had childhood memories, friendships, personal struggles, dreams, moments of happiness, moments of difficulty. They were not defined by the circumstances that made them vulnerable. They were defined by being human. That understanding has become one of the most important lessons from the case. As investigations continue, questions remain. Additional victims may still need answers. Additional evidence may still emerge. The legal process will continue determining what can be proven. But the impact of the investigation is already clear. It changed how many people think about cold cases. It demonstrated the power of modern forensic science. It reminded investigators that old evidence can still hold new information. And it reinforced a simple truth. A case is never truly forgotten as long as someone continues searching. The story of Gilgo Beach is often described as a mystery. But mysteries are solved through human effort. Through patience. Through technology. Through determination. Through the belief that every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed. Years after the first discoveries along Ocean Parkway, the investigation remains a reminder that silence does not always mean the truth is gone. Sometimes the truth is simply waiting. Waiting for someone to look again. Waiting for science to catch up. Waiting for the right question to be asked. And waiting for the voices of those who were lost to finally be heard.